Right now, in March 2026, while global news networks are broadcasting endless loops of footage showing 3,500 United States Marines touching down in the Persian Gulf, something much quieter and infinitely more dangerous is happening right under your nose. The headlines want you looking at the sky, counting drones, and watching interceptor missiles light up the night. But if you look away from the smoke and mirrors show in the Middle East and focus your attention on Wall Street, you will notice a terrifying paradox. While the average American citizen is panic selling their retirement portfolio and hoarding cash in fear of a global meltdown, institutional investors, the smart money, are quietly orchestrating one of the largest capital rotations we have seen in years. This is Prism News, and today we are not just reading the headlines, we are decoding the matrix of global finance, geopolitics, and human psychology to show you what is actually happening to your money, your health, and your future. Let us start with a simple yet chilling fact. 72 hours before the Pentagon officially released the images of those troops deploying, the volatility index, commonly known as the fear gauge on Wall Street, experienced a massive, unexplained spike. Simultaneously, trade volumes for major defense and aerospace contractors surged by hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you really believe that was a coincidence? Or is it possible that geopolitical crises are not just random explosions of chaos, but highly choreographed financial events? When you see the media bombarding you with terms like ground invasion and rain of fire, you have to ask yourself one question. What are they trying to distract you from? Because every time a crisis of this magnitude dominates the screen, it usually serves as a convenient smokescreen for structural economic failures that the central planners desperately need to hide. Keep watching, because in a few minutes, I am going to reveal the exact financial files they do not want you looking at while you are busy watching the war on your television. To understand the real war, you have to follow the money, not the missiles. The mainstream media paints a picture of unexpected escalation, but the financial data tells a completely different story. According to recent flow of funds, reports analyzed by Bloomberg, hedge funds and corporate insiders were actively dumping consumer discretionary stocks and rotating heavily into energy, commodities, and defense sectors weeks before the first sirens sounded in Tehran or Tel Aviv. This is the ultimate execution of the classic Wall Street doctrine. Buy the rumor, sell the news. But we are not talking about a corporate merger here. We are talking about human lives and global stability being priced into financial derivatives. The crisis you are watching unfold in the Gulf is functioning as a massive wealth transfer mechanism. When the working class sees instability, they freeze. They stop investing, they accept lower wages out of fear of losing their jobs, and they absorb the cost of rising gas prices. But when the elite look at the exact same instability, they see a highly leveraged opportunity. By the time the news reaches your screen, the trade has already been made, and the profits have already been secured. The real front line is not in the desert. It is in the high-frequency trading algorithms operating in lower Manhattan, but the financial manipulation is only half of the equation. To truly keep the population compliant and distracted, the system requires a biological component, and that is where the most insidious weapon of this entire crisis is deployed. Not a drone, not a bomb, but a direct attack on your nervous system. I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself a very personal question. When was the last time you made a brilliant, forward-thinking financial decision while you were overwhelmed with anxiety? The answer is probably never, and the architects of the global economy know this. Welcome to what I call the trauma economy. The continuous broadcasting of the Middle East crisis is not about keeping you informed. It is a psychological operation designed to keep your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, in a constant state of hyper-arousal. Every time you scroll through images of burning industrial parks or hear threats of a wider conflict, your adrenal glands pump cortisol into your bloodstream. Cortisol is the stress hormone. In short bursts, it keeps you alive. But chronic exposure to cortisol destroys your immune system, disrupts your sleep, and most importantly, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, long-term planning, and financial discipline. The media wants you sick, tired, and terrified. Why? Because a frightened population is a profitable population. When you are stressed, you do not research complex economic policies or question central bank corruption. You seek comfort. You consume junk food, you buy things you do not need for a dopamine hit, and eventually, you become a lifelong customer of the pharmaceutical industry just to cope with the anxiety. This is a biological heist. They are using geopolitical theater to steal your peace of mind. Because as long as you are trapped in a state of survival, you will never have the mental bandwidth to challenge the system. Let me know in the comments below, do you feel physically exhausted after watching a standard 30-minute news broadcast? Because that exhaustion is not an accident. It is the product. As the trauma economy keeps the masses paralyzed, the real economic restructuring takes place in the shadows. Look at the comments sections across social media right now. The American people are waking up. Thousands of people are ignoring the war drums and demanding one simple thing. They are saying, just release the files. They are pointing out the absurd reality of young Americans being sent to guard foreign deserts while our own cities crumble. People are beginning to realize that the current crisis is the perfect exogenous shock. An exogenous shock is an external event that central banks and governments use as a scapegoat for their own disastrous policies. Think about it. The Federal Reserve and the International Monetary Fund have been struggling with a debt crisis of unprecedented proportions. Before the deployment of those 3,500 Marines, the domestic narrative was focused on bank failures, soaring national debt, and the destruction of the middle class. But now the government has a blank check. Every spike in inflation, every supply chain failure, and every new trillion-dollar borrowing package will be blamed on the conflict in the Gulf. They are using the threat of war to justify the devaluation of your currency. It is a brilliant, ruthless strategy. The politicians get to play commander-in-chief, the defense contractors secure decades of government funding, and the taxpayer is left holding the bag, paying for it all through the hidden tax of inflation. And this brings us to a fundamental question. If this war is so profitable, will they ever let it end? If you apply the principles of game theory to the current situation in the Middle East, a very dark, very clear picture emerges. The mainstream analysis asks, who will win the war? But Prism News asks a different question. Who profits from perpetual tension? The truth is, a full-scale, total war is bad for global business. It destroys infrastructure and halts international trade. Conversely, absolute peace is terrible for the military-industrial complex and the surveillance state. Therefore, the optimal mathematical outcome for the ruling class is exactly what we are seeing right now. A state of permanent, managed escalation. It is a geopolitical tightrope walk. They launch just enough drone strikes to keep the fear alive, deploy just enough troops to justify defense budgets, and issue just enough threats to keep the oil markets volatile. But they deliberately avoid the final, catastrophic blow. Iran strikes an empty desert facility. The United States hits a radar station. It is a highly choreographed dance of destruction where the only real losers are the working-class taxpayers funding the performance. This is why you will continue to see aggressive rhetoric followed by back-channel negotiations. They do not want to destroy the game board. They just want to keep you glued to the game, terrified of the next move, while they extract the entry fee directly from your paycheck. To see the strings attached to this puppet show, we have to follow the barrels of oil. The Persian Gulf is the most critical energy choke point on the planet. According to recent shipping data verified by Reuters, millions of barrels of crude oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. The mere threat of a blockade or an attack on shipping lanes sends energy futures skyrocketing. But who really pays the price? When the cost of crude oil jumps, it is not just the price of gasoline that goes up. Oil is the lifeblood of the global supply chain. It dictates the cost of transporting food, manufacturing plastics, and producing fertilizers. A sudden spike in energy costs acts as a massive regressive tax, disproportionately hurting the lower and middle classes. But here is the secret the media ignores. Even under heavy sanctions, sanctioned nations are still selling their oil. They are just selling it at a massive discount through a dark fleet of ghost ships to global powers who are more than happy to buy cheap energy while the West pays a premium. The sanctions and the military posturing create a dual-tier energy market. The elites and massive multinational conglomerates find ways to hedge their energy costs or buy through back channels, while the American consumer is forced to absorb the full, inflated price at the pump. The military presence in the Gulf is not protecting your access to cheap energy. It is enforcing a system that ensures you pay the maximum possible price. There is another layer to this crisis that requires your immediate attention. We are witnessing the terrifying merger of Silicon Valley and the Pentagon. This is no longer just a war of traditional ballistic missiles and boots on the ground. It is a war of artificial intelligence, mass data collection, and autonomous systems. You are watching a real-time, taxpayer-funded testing ground for the next generation of surveillance and combat technology. Consider the absolute financial absurdity of the current engagement. We are watching the United States military fire interceptor missiles that cost millions of dollars each to shoot down commercial-grade drones that cost a few $1,000s to build. From a purely mathematical standpoint, it is an unsustainable strategy, but from a corporate standpoint, it is a gold rush. Every time a $1 million missile is fired, a defense contractor gets an order to build a replacement. And who is supplying the software, the targeting algorithms, and the cloud computing infrastructure for these systems? The same tech giants whose devices are currently sitting in your pocket. The data harvested from the battlefield in the Middle East is being fed into the same artificial intelligence models that will eventually be used to monitor, track, and predict human behavior globally. The war overseas is accelerating the development of the control grid at home. Let us bring this back to your wallet. Every time the government deploys a carrier strike group, every time they send thousands of troops across the world, and every time they sign a new foreign aid package, they are spending money they do not have. The United States Treasury cannot afford these operations through taxation alone. So, what do? They print the difference. Or more accurately, the Federal Reserve creates new digital currency out of thin air to purchase government debt. This expansion of the money supply dilutes the value of every single dollar you have worked so hard to save. This is the shadow inflation tax. When you go to the grocery store and see that the price of eggs, bread, and meat has doubled, you are not just seeing corporate greed. You are paying the bill for the foreign policy adventures you never voted for. You are paying for the drones, the missiles, and the intelligence operations. The government does not need to raise your income tax to take your wealth. They just inflate it away. By keeping the public mesmerized by the conflict, they prevent you from realizing that the real invasion is happening inside your bank account. The purchasing power of the middle class is being systematically obliterated to finance a global empire that no longer serves the interests of its own citizens. So, how do we navigate this matrix of deception? At Prism News, our goal is to give you the vision to see the board from above. The first step is to stop reacting to the headlines and start reading the tape. When the news anchor tells you to panic about an imminent ground invasion, ignore their words and look at the bond market. Look at the yield curve. Look at the price of physical gold. The markets never lie, even when the politicians do. If the threat of world war was truly imminent, you would see a massive, unprecedented liquidation of all risk assets. Instead, what we see is calculated repositioning. The ruling class is using the volatility to shake weak hands out of the market, allowing them to buy valuable assets at a discount. You must adopt the mindset of an independent intelligence analyst. Understand that the media is not a public utility designed to inform you. It is a corporate entity designed to monetize your attention and manipulate your behavior. Once you accept this reality, the fear begins to fade and the clarity begins to set in. You are no longer a victim of the trauma economy. You become an observer, capable of protecting your family and your future. The ultimate rebellion against this corrupt system is not a protest. It is financial and mental independence. You must build a firewall around your mind and your money. First, implement strict information fasting. Stop consuming the 24-hour news cycle. It is toxic to your biology and detrimental to your wealth. Limit your intake of geopolitical news to raw data and independent analysis. Protect your cortisol levels as fiercely as you protect your bank account. Second, recognize that in a world of infinite money printing and permanent crisis, holding fiat currency is a guaranteed loss. The smart money is securing hard assets, land, commodities, critical infrastructure, and immutable digital assets. They are buying things that central banks cannot print and politicians cannot bomb. The elite are preparing for a new economic paradigm, and you must do the same. This channel, Prism News, is your sanctuary from the noise. We do not sell fear, we decode the truth. If you found value in this analysis, if you are ready to stop being a pawn in their geopolitical game, then subscribe to the channel right now. Leave a comment below and tell me how you are protecting your assets from the shadow inflation tax. In our next video, we are going to dive deep into a hidden vulnerability in the domestic banking sector that the media is completely ignoring. You will not want to miss it. Stay sharp, stay sovereign, and I will see you next time.